Right, okay, so without further ado, welcome everyone to the Council of Governors today. Lovely to see you all, and I hope you're all keeping hydrated and you've got your glasses of water at your sides. So the first, let's come on to the agenda, if we may, first of all, just to say that we have got some apologies which are noted on the agenda. So we've got apologies from Yvonne. We've also got apologies from Devendra Khurana, from Graham Plant, Lewis Griffin, Stuart Everett, and Tron Coleman. We've also got apologies for some late arrivals. So James Reader will be attending, but he's apologised. I think he's travelling, so he'll be arriving at this public meeting a bit late, and he won't be able to attend the private part. And Joe, our chief executive, has also got a clash of meetings this morning, and it's with an external meeting, not an internal meeting, so it's a system meeting that she felt it was important that she did attend. So she will be coming, but again is going to be a little bit late. We might just have to swap the slides around when it comes to the assurance piece, so that she comes at the end of that process rather than the beginning, but she will be joining us as soon as she possibly can. Welcome first of all, if I may, to Charlie. Charlie Helps. Charlie, just might want to sort of just say a quick hello and wave so people can see you. Charlie is
good morning. Thank you, Chair.
Anne Philby's replacement. So this will be his first sort of council as the company secretary. So good. So any declarations of interest that we haven't already noted? No, that's great. Okay, so can we then go to the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 11th of May? For those people that were here, and you'll see there was only a few from the governor perspective, any alterations or any mistakes in those minutes that you'd like to highlight? If not, are we happy to accept those as a true record? Thank you. And are there any matters arising that are not on the action sheets that anyone would like to raise? If not, we'll go straight to the action sheets. Thank you, which is, there are a collection as usual of greens and ambers. So first of all, I'd like to suggest and propose that the greens are closed unless we have anyone who feels that there isn't sufficient assurance there to close those off. Is everyone happy to close the greens? And then we'd just like to go to the amber, and that one relates to the mandatory training. And I think that as a result of that plea, all bar one governor have actually completed their mandatory training. So as I understand it, I'm very grateful to those who have found the time to do that, but I will be having to follow up with the one governor who hasn't. You know, we can't just let it lie. Unfortunately, we do have to make sure that every single one of our governors meets the fit and proper persons requirements. So Charlie and I will be discussing how best to take that forwards, given that we've given each governor quite a lot of notice to do these things. So I think we can, I think I'd like to close the action because I'm taking it forward, but it isn't completely gone away, but I will update you as to what has happened at some point when we've actually resolved it, but I don't think it needs to be an open action because I am dealing with it. Good morning, Lewis, lovely to see you. Is everyone happy that we take that off the action sheet? Or would people prefer that we leave it on until it is resolved? Ian, do you have a view? Just to
I'm happy that it's being declared and is minuted here in terms of you taking further action. Therefore, I think it can be removed.
That's brilliant. Good. So we're now coming, and also I'd just like to welcome, I think we do have a member of the public who's joined us today. So a big welcome to Miss Grote, who's with us today, I think, who is a governor at the NNN. So she's observing today as part of the public meeting. So big warm welcome to her. So this next part of the agenda is for obviously you as governors. This is your opportunity to hold the NEDs to account for the activities that they are doing to assure themselves of the performance of the trust. So really this opportunity for you to listen to each of the non-execs, including myself, to talk about the work that we've been doing and to ask questions of us to demonstrate that we are receiving that assurance and that we're doing our job properly on your behalf and on behalf of our members. So what we're going to do, Sue, if you could you put the slide up into the sort of single presentation mode so people can see it a bit better? Is that possible? If not, don't worry. Oh, it's gone away. So the first slide is the chief exec. So we're going to go past those anyway, and we'll come back to those because obviously at this point, don't worry, Sue, that's fine. We can everybody see that? Okay, there we go. Lovely. So Sue, if you could move over Joe's slides and come to mine, that would be great. And I'm going to just go through some of the activities that I've been undertaking as the chair. And what I tried to do this time is sort of link those into the activities that a chair should be undertaking. So there's a bit of what we're doing within the trust itself, a bit of what I've been doing at the system level, and a bit of what I've been doing at the national level, because it kind of encompasses all of those different parts of the role, encompasses all of those different things. So the first point there talks about appointments, and NEDs get involved not just in the appointments of, well, they do get involved in the appointments of the executive. You as governors obviously get involved in the appointments of the non-executives. So I wanted to confirm a couple of changes to the board and the executive level. So the first is that we successfully appointed Mr. Vivek Chitri as our new medical director from the end of July 2022. So he will be replacing Hazel Stewart, who is retiring. So Mr. Chitri, the appointment panel included David Scott, who is, as you know, the chair of our Patient Safety and Quality Committee. And that was a unanimous decision, which was supported also on the panel by our new ICB medical director. So the Integrated Care Board medical director was also on the panel, as were, then there were lots of stakeholder panels as well. So that was a successful appointment. You'll also remember that when Jo was appointed as chief executive, she left a vacancy of 2 behind her. And when we last met, we were going through, or about to go through, an appointment process to replace her permanently. But unfortunately, that did not result in an appointment. But we do still have an excellent interim who is working with us, and there is a re-advertisement currently out, and we hope to have a conclusion and a permanent coup very shortly. Also, just to confirm, I've already introduced Charlie. Charlie obviously has taken over as Anne Philby's replacement. So as well as that, you'll be aware on the non-exec front, because we've already gone through with the NNR Committee of Governors, that Paula's tenancy, if you like, as a non-exec is coming to an end in October. So the recruitment process to cover that vacancy is underway. And we've also very sadly heard that Laura is going to have to step down as our UEA NED for some really good reasons, and we want to congratulate her for those reasons. She's actually been offered a very prestigious promotion in another part of the country, and will be sadly having to leave our board, and we will miss her very much. So we are now in conversation with the UEA again to go through the process of finding a replacement for Laura. So these changes at board level, and they're coupled obviously with quite a lot of change and churn in the external environment, really mean that board, more than it would normally do, needs to sort of sit back a little and reflect and think about the future and ensure that all the bases are covered, that we've got you know, the right people in the right roles, that we know what we're doing, and that we're planning to ensure that our objectives can be met for the rest of the year. So obviously with a new chief executive as well, it's really important that I understand Jo's ambitions for the trust. So she and I have started the process off. We arranged and participated in a sort of off work, so outside the trust away day, a facilitated planning session, which was really useful, really helpful, helped us to identify each other's styles of working and styles of leadership, if you like, so that we can complement each other. But it also started us to think about how we can work with the board to make the same thing happen, to ensure that we've got all of the right levels of skill as well as the right competencies in place. So we're going to follow up that planning session with a series of board development activities, which will take place throughout the year to ensure that we're ready for what the future brings. NED appraisals, you'll hear a bit more about in the private part of the meeting, but obviously they all needed to be managed, done and dusted and written up. So that's part of the work that I've been doing since we last met. I've also been involved in, as I always am, chairing consultant panels, so panels for the appointment of consultants, and there have been 2 since we last met, where we've successfully appointed both a new consultant to the A&E department and a consultant to the anaesthetics department. So 2 specialisms where we had important vacancies and where we obviously have an awful lot of demand. So we were delighted to be able to make some 2 good appointments. To go on to the next slide. Oh, sorry, not quite. Yes, I've got the last point there, sorry, about the quality and improvement assurance activities. So just wanted to say, obviously, as part of our NED role, our role is to seek direct assurance from the trust and by visiting various areas as to the quality and the safety of the services. And one of the activities by which we do that is to participate in weekly quality walkabouts. And the NEDs all take part in those, and we are on a rota system, and each week one of us will attend a quality and safety walk around. And one of my recent visits was to the very lovely facility that we have here that isn't that widely known, but it's called the Dolphin Suite. It's in our maternity section, and it's a midwife-led unit where mums can go if they have are likely to have a problem-free delivery. They have water baths and private rooms, and it's a really lovely facility. So I was able to have a tour around that and talk to our newly appointed consultant midwife about how to maximise the use of that. So if we go on then to the next slide, part of the system work obviously involves the Norfolk and Waveney Hospital Group work. So this is what we're calling the Acute Collaborative. This is the way in which each of the 3 acute trusts are working together more closely to try to ensure that we help each other to deliver against all the targets that we have in terms of elective care and emergency care. but also to ensure that we try to drive out efficiencies across the whole of the NHS, because obviously within our own system, there's going to be a big challenge financially for the coming year in meeting the targets that we have. So I attend monthly meetings of the Norfolk and Waveney Hospitals group, but I've also started much more frequent liaison meetings with the new acting chairs at both of the other two trusts. So both of the other two trusts had their substantive chairs leave for different reasons, and are being covered at the moment by acting chairs. But it's been quite an interesting opportunity really to work with them and to kind of bring them up to speed, but also for us to try to improve the way in which we work together. So that's been very successful. The reports from the Norfolk and Waveney Hospital Group, there we have sort of some single reports that come out to our boards and are shared at the public board meetings. So we provide public accountability through that route, and we also have the governors group, which is called the Governors Forum, with whom information is directly shared. In terms of the development of you as a council and you know, the efficiency of the way in which you work as a council, we held our first face-to-face development session. We'd had a virtual one previously on the 16th of June, and we had a really interesting proactive session, which was part of which Ian gave on active questioning, which was, you know, I felt I learned something from that session as well as everyone else. And all of those who attended were very positive about how it helped them to understand their role, but to be better at their role. I think our only disappointment was that not as many governors attended as we would have liked. And, you know, I would encourage you all to come to these events. We do try to plan them a long time in advance. And it is really important as part of the role to understand what's going on both in our own hospital, but obviously in the wider context. So I'll put out a plea for you all to perhaps look out for the next one, which we're planning in October. Make sure that you have it in your diary, make sure that you can come and that you take part in that, because it's a really important part of the role of being a governor. In terms of the system engagement, and again, you know, my role isn't just about the trust, it is about how we interact within the system. And of course, as a chair, I am a member now of the newly formed Integrated Care Partnership, and you'll have a little bit more explanation of the structure within the Integrated Care Board, the partnership, and how that makes up the integrated care system in our private session later. And I also participate in something that's been called the Chairs Forum, which is all of the chairs of all of the health and care organisations meet sort of semi-informally really to bring areas of concern or listen to what's happening in the ICB. And that's been formed really in this transition period so that we all feel comfortable that we understand what's happening. It may not continue in the longer term, but for now it's a useful way to engage. And then my other sort of system role, I've been asked to be a member of the appointment panel for one of the other trusts in our system, which is the NCH&C, the Community Trust. They are appointing for a new chair, so that's next week. I shall be on their appointment panel for that. And then finally, in terms of national engagement, there are a huge range of activities that I could attend virtually, and I try to get to as many as possible. Some of them are not on there, so but things like the Good Governance Institute run a whole range of different opportunities for NEDs, and I go to a large number of those. But also the NHS Providers Organisation does an enormous number of events, and they ran a governance conference recently over 2 or 3 days with enormous amounts of input from different people, and I dipped in and out of that over 3 days, all virtually. And I also regularly attend their national chairs and CEOs events, which is an opportunity to bring all of the NHS chairs and CEOs into the same virtual room and talk about some of the issues that are common to all of us. So it's been a busy few months, but I'm very happy to take questions on any of those items. Ian, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It'd be a judge of how well our training went as to whether people are asking questions today, and I'm trying to not to ask too many questions. I can see John H. there laughing as he had the pleasure of putting up with me sitting next to him on the question session. So actually, I don't want to ask a question. I just want to make a point, if I may, Anna.
Yes,
the volume of work of what you're doing there goes way above and beyond what I think you were appointed to as the chair, with all of the changes that are going on. And I think that needs to be recognised in the sheer volume of what's happening at the moment. But to make the point, as far as we are concerned with James Paget, it is a period of change. And I think that really does need to be taken on board by the Council of Governors in recognising that change and making sure that we as the Council of Governors are supporting you and the NEDs and the board in the work that needs to be done. And that does mean extra work for us. I mean, I'm involved with you, and that's an advantage that I have a meeting and on a more regular basis and getting a lot of these updates. But it does mean extra work for us as a council. It's not just about being at the meetings. It is about looking for those opportunities where appropriate to get involved in interview process and things where we can. So it's just a plea to recognise that our role is at the moment more challenging as well as the council, and we need to be there supporting and doing more than perhaps we would normally have expected at this time to make sure this change settles in and that stability is maintained for a successful trust as it's working at the moment. So I just felt that was important to highlight, Anna. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ian. That's very supportive of you, and I do recognise the work that's involved, the extra work that's involved for our executive colleagues as well as for the NEDs. And I think all of my fellow NEDs will, I know, feel slightly stretched at the moment with everything that they're being asked to do. But it's equally an issue for our exec, as you know, from the fact that Jo was conflicted this morning. She very much wants to be here, but this exec-led meeting at the ICB, she felt if she wasn't there, then obviously that might disadvantage the Paget. So going forwards, we really have to work out, and one of the things we need to do is to think about how we cover off all of those different attendances in a way that allows us to participate at the right level, but also that keeps our real focus on delivering the right things within our hospital for our patients, which we simply can't afford to take our eye off that ball. So thank you, Ian, appreciate that recognition. Tony, can I ask you to come in? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Listening to Ian, it's not really a question as such, but it was very interesting how involved you are at the moment, and that the pressure work that's been placed on you and the other NEDs. As a public governor, I mean, if there's anything that we can do, I think you just need to say, oh, we need some help or support here, and I'm sure we'll come around and give you the support and help you need, and appreciate all you're doing for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. That's really very kind, and I do appreciate the support that you are all able to offer. So, I think for me, the biggest part of that, and those of you who are here today are those that will normally do turn up to things. It's just to encourage your fellow governors, if you can, to maintain that attendance, because it's really important for us to be able to have a meeting which we can know without sort of having the last minute panic. Are we quora? Are we not panic? Are we panicking for nothing? So there was a lot of flurry of activity yesterday, which Sue, bless her, has taken on, but she could do without that extra piece of work as well. So I think it's about thinking about how all of your actions can help us run this as smoothly as possible. So, really appreciate that offer, Tony, and we will certainly take you up on it if we can. So thank you. And James, welcome to you as well. Would you like to come in with your question?
Yes, thank you very much. And not a question as to two previous people, but just because Tony and Ian were on the same table, I thought it was important that our table actually spoke up, and therefore I support everything that Ian and Tony has just said, and any requests will be met with the best intentions, if I can say that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, James, and that's very kind of you. And as I say, it was a really enjoyable session. I think we all enjoyed it. So we'll be thinking about what best to put in the next one. So if you have any ideas of your own as to how we can make that session right for you, then both Ian and I would really welcome, and Charlie as well, because he'll be planning this next session in the background. We'll really welcome your thoughts as to what to include to make it as valuable as possible. Okay, so let's move on then, if we can, to quality and patient experience. So patient safety and quality, over to you, David. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna, and welcome to everybody. This is slightly different from the previous reports because I thought it important just to let you know some of the things we do that don't get reported because they're routine and we review things. And so the first bullet point is just a kind of summary of the sort of basic work that the committee undertakes. So just a reminder that we review the bits of the BAF that are relevant to patient safety and quality. The risk register and all the clinical risks are reviewed in some detail, and it's important to recognise that risk register is a sort of changing document and it's undergoing what they've called a spring clean at the moment, and part of that relates to changes in the way IT data is collected, and I might come back to that later if I'm still required to do the audit report, because that's relevant to that. And we also review a dashboard of a whole range of data that tells us how things are going, serious incidents, falls, all various types and severities of pressure ulcers. Come back to maternity, things like duty of candour, which was a problem but is now very much improved, and complaints. And it's just a reflection that the committee has kind of a duty and a responsibility, not just to look at this data, but to challenge the exec about concerns there may be. And one of the concerns we've had has been within maternity is about smoking in pregnancy. It's addressed and asked and discussed quite frequently. It's not easy to change, but there are a number of processes that we're trying to undertake to improve the data in terms of people who not only are smoking when they become pregnant, but some are still smoking when they deliver. And we know that that has an adverse effect on outcome. The committee also reviews research, and one of the positives really to say is that there are two main strands of research, what we might call conventional research, undertaken under Ben Burton's care. There's a research governance committee, and that has been very effective and very successful. But there's been a kind of huge, almost explosion of research under the name NMAHP, which is nurses, midwives and allied health professionals. And this was all stimulated by a nurse called Claire Whitehouse, which has been incredibly successful and led to a recent meeting with the regional regional nurse involved with research. And Claire is up for a number of nursing times awards. In fact, the research is, and she is individually. So there's a very active and I think successful research program which we should just be pleased about. We also have addressed and had reviews on consent. There was a question about consent quite some time ago, and there have been audits done on consent, and actually consent's now been addressed in all three trusts. And I mentioned the three acute trusts. Well, Vivek, our new medical director, has been involved with a tri-hospital, all three hospitals, and they've developed a consent program. The important thing is that's fine. We want to just make sure that consent is being undertaken. And so the importance is to address audits in response to this to make sure that consent is being undertaken. As a consequence of COVID, clinical harm has been a big worry, and that is the clinical harm of people on waiting lists. And we had a review about the clinical harm strategy and encouraging comments and encouraging data about the number of reviews undertaken. There still is an issue about how many patients are on waiting lists, but the important thing was to make sure that people who are on long waiting lists aren't coming to harm. And a big effort has been made, and the report told us big numbers, the much bigger numbers have had proper clinical harm reviews. We have reviews of mental health strategy, and that was very interesting and informative. There was the only issue that was raised about that was concerns about 24-hour compliance, i.e. having somebody available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week when mental health issues arise. And that's something that was addressed at the last meeting, or reported at the last meeting, and is being looked at by the exec. I am the non-exec lead for maternity, and at our patient safety and quality meeting, we always discuss maternity services in some detail. You'll all know about the Ockenden report and will have seen in the press how Dame Ockenden is now looking at Nottingham, and I think there is a huge amount of interest and concern about maternity services throughout the country, and I think it's really important that we address our own issues. And so we review how we've got on with the recommendations from Ockenden. We get an update from them, and that's from Kirsty Cater, head of midwifery. So it's something we address and look at very carefully. And there's been some concerns it's just important to recognise in terms of the consultant obstetricians, in terms of numbers and leadership, and concerns about culture that we reported before. And it's just to say that at this meeting we address and challenge the exec about what's happening about those issues. And some of them came to light a little bit following a regional Ockenden visit, which highlighted some of the concerns. Finally, to report that we have again gone back to getting some divisional reports, and I would say this was an absolutely excellent report. I mean, it was excellent in terms of its information. It wasn't necessarily totally reassuring because there are concerns, but we asked the divisions basically to say, what are the 3 biggest problems that keep you awake at night? What bothers you most? And Phil gave us a very succinct 5-page report that said it all. But the concerns, perhaps not surprising to you, are about patient flow, elective recovery and staff well-being. But there were action points and there are issues that are being addressed about all of those problems. I'll happily stop there and take questions if that's okay, Anna.
Thank you, David. That's great. So let's first of all go to Mary, if we may. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Morning all. When patients are in hospital or when they leave, they fill in often a survey form. Where do they all go to? Are they kept in each department? And if there is sort of really a concern on any of these forms, do they get back to that patient?
Thanks, Mary. The answer is that I don't know exactly, but I know there's an FFT, there's a friends and family test that's across. But in terms of the reports, I would ask in detail. I have to ask for some help with that answer.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I think you are referring to the friends and family test, and that is something that gets collated across the hospital and actually is reported in our public board report. Obviously, if there are concerns raised, there's a separate process by which that patient would be contacted. But I know Joe's put her hand up, and as our operational person here today, you might want to come in, Joe, with your understanding and much better understanding of how that actually works.
Yeah, so I think it is the FFT, and as you're right, Anna, that all of that information gets collated and we report that through to the PSQ, and the comments are also looked at, and any concerns raised by patients at the time or relatives would be going through our PALS department, so we can act on them immediately. So there is a response immediately of any concerns raised.
It's worth saying that as part of the dashboard we get the FFT data, Mary, so that we review, and there are some concerns in terms of some issues in ED, and well, ED has been the main area of concern for FFT. I think that's right.
Thanks,
Okay.
David. Mary, that's great. If there was something sort of, that's obviously confirms the understanding of the process, but if there's something else behind that you wanted to follow up with anyone, then could you just email Charlie and let him know if there was a concern that you had that we might not want to raise in the public meeting, but that you might want to have looked at separately if you had a particular concern. Okay,
Will do,
lovely.
thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Tony.
Thank you. The mental health strategy, does that include neurodiversity, or is neurodiversity a separate item within the Trust's strategy?
I don't think specifically. I think that, I mean, again, I would I might require some help with this, and but the mental health strategy is more about mental health issues arising on the wards and our cover. There is, for example, some serious issues about mental health problems in pediatrics, and we have 3 or 4 beds often with young people with serious mental health issues causing a lot of work. And it's addressing how we get the mental health, the trust involved, how we cover those problems, and that's what the strategy actually has concentrated on. In terms of neurodiversity, I think I'd have to come to ask for some help on that.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about really how our strategy, if you like, relates to the patients who come into our care who potentially have needs and how we manage that, but we're not a mental health hospital. So, you know, potentially where that might be referred to, Tony, would be in the mental health strategy for the system as opposed to for our own individual hospital. But Joe, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think you've answered the question there, Anna. The mental health strategy is very much about what happens to patients who are in our facility, and the 24-hour compliance is the core 24 service for patients who are in crisis, and how we work together. And we have some joint posts, and we have an on-site presence from the Mental Health Trust to help support those patients. But there is legislation that we have to comply with when patients are with us who may have physical needs but also a mental health need. So that's where the strategy sits.
But we wouldn't have specific mental health conditions referred to within our strategy simply because that isn't our bread and butter. I think is probably the right answer, Tony. You need to look at the NSFT strategy and specific clinical strategies within there, or at the system level, to get perhaps the very direct answer that you might be looking for in relation to that specific condition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Lovely.
I wouldn't consider it a mental health issue, but it is an issue
I'm
everywhere.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. I do appreciate where you're coming from. I think James is next.
Yes, thank you very much. I was just wondering whether David could give us the reassurance, which I'm sure he can, because in the press and other places, as you've mentioned about the research that James Padgett is doing, I personally think that is terrific. I think it obviously enables the James Padgett to look at new ways of working and new cures, etc. So could I just have David's thoughts and reassurance that whilst obviously that takes a lot of resource, at the end of the day, it is very beneficial to the trust?
Sure. Well, as somebody who's involved in research all my life, the comment which is always the most encouraging is places where there's active clinical research, there's better clinical outcomes. So research is, I think, an absolutely essential, integral part of clinical care. And I think the research that Claire's leading will lead to clinical benefit, and it's been great to see it develop. So yes, I can assure you that it is a part and parcel of the clinical activity of the trust. It's supported by the committee through patient safety and quality, because a lot of it involves patients involved in research rather than if you like basic science. And if when we go back to Joe's report, there's a comment about some of the successes in terms of within midwifery, which she'll perhaps come back to later. But yes, it's been very successful and very encouraging.
Thank you very much.
David, I'd just like a little shout out, if we can, for our wonderful Dr. John Chapman and the paediatric team, who have just successfully concluded some research on peanut allergy. And we are actually world leading, I think, in terms of that research. And we're so proud of that, and I think quite rightly so. And I know it's something that, you know, Jo was telling me only yesterday, she's obviously reviewing how research is kind of the focus of research is delivered within the trust, just to make sure that absolute importance of it is followed through within her own executive. So if there's anything you want to add, Jo, do, but if not, no, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think I was going to cover it on my slides, but yes,
Okay.
we are reviewing the sort of the internal governance, and that will be led by the medical director, and there will be some further papers coming through to patient safety and quality that David will see in the next couple of months.
Lovely, thank you, and thanks for that question, James. It allowed us to highlight something really special that the trust has been doing. Tony, is that a legacy hand or is that a new question?
Sorry, it's a legacy hand. I'll remove it.
Thank you. Okay, lovely. Well, if no other questions, can we then move on to the next slide, please, if we may? And I think, David, you are in it for today, because I haven't seen Stephen.
No.
Stephen's away at the moment, so I think you're going to do audit, is that right?
Yep, happy to do
Lovely.
audit.
Thank you, David.
I may, like the last time, call on help with some of the issues in audit, but the audit committee met on the 8th of June, and Steve's summarised most of the issues on the slide, concentrating particularly on the accounts from 21-22. I mentioned in the patient safety and quality report the changes in IT in terms of the risk register, and there are a number of software developments, including one called, I think, InPhase, which is on the next bullet point, and these are being addressed and have been added to internal audit. They're actually obviously improvements, so we wouldn't be doing them, but we have to make sure that they are safe and adequate and really address those. So those have been added to the internal audit plan, and it says there in risk management software, and that is relevant, I think, to the risk register as well. We, as an audit committee, review some important statements at this time of year. There are some quite critical timeframes within these, which I'll come back to at the very end, but the next bullet point just lists all those. Apologies for the typo. I think that should be board approval rather than for beard approval. But yes, it is. I'm sorry, I've got mine and I've got the other one, just to make sure it wasn't changed in the middle. So yes, those are the important data and the approval of various things that have to be approved, particularly this time of year. We have some recommendations in terms of internal audit, but that's to be completed and will have been completed by the end of June. And we've made an internal audit plan for 22-23. The other thing is to mention that the NEDs all meet with the audit committee away from the execs, and that's done at one meeting a year, and that's the final bullet point. And in fact, at before the next audit committee meeting, there is a meeting between the NEDs and the accountants to make sure we are independent and can reassure them about the independence of our activities. And finally, there's a comment about internal audit, which I'd like to Steve has sent me a comment that he'd like me to make, and I'd like to just do that verbatim as follows. Now, the International Standard on Audit, which is ISA 260, which is part of the Audit Findings 21-22, deals with the auditor's responsibility to communicate with those charged with governance and deals with their responsibilities to consider laws and regulations when auditing financial statements. This report, which was unsigned, was considered by the Audit Committee on the 8th of June. And at that time, work on the financial statements was incomplete, but the report indicated there were no significant concerns. It was therefore agreed to recommend approval of the financial statements to board on the 16th of June. And this was subject to receipt of a memorandum from KPMG that there were no significant interim changes and that the audit would be signed off on 20th of June. This took place and there were no concerns. So the signed and final version is therefore available. The only changes to the draft are set out in relation to pension disclosures, and in reality that's a minor issue caused by the pension provider and a non-contentious issue related to journal controls. Lastly, it's worth noting that in one of the appendices, reference is made to new accounting standards ISA 315, and the general tone is that this will make the production of final statements more onerous for both hospitals and the auditors. And that's just a statement from Steve about this, about some of the specifics in terms of things being signed off. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, David. Any questions for David on audit? And thank you for covering Stephen's slide as a member of the audit committee. Thank you. No, okay, no questions on that one. Thank you. So shall we now move on to a couple of slides, I think, from Laura on sort of speaking out, the Freedoms to Speak Out programme and wellbeing. Laura. Are you there, Laura? Oh, we lost Laura. Are you muted, Laura? I can try. Hang on. I can't unmute you, Laura. Okay, look, Laura, if you maybe go out and log back in, and we'll come back to your slides. We're going to swap on and do the next ones and then give you time to log back in. Is that okay? So can we go on to Karen as chair of the People and Culture Committee? Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Anna. And if Laura can't sort it out, I've got some notes to provide the update. So, but just to say, the People and Culture Committee, we met on the 23rd of June. And at the previous one, given the amount of papers and issues and a lot happening around the trust in relation to staffing, we agreed to actually extend that meeting by 2.5 hours. And just to remind the governors, this is a committee that meets bi-monthly, and that seemed to work very well. And also, I think worth noting, given the ongoing pressure the trust are experiencing, the staff are working in really challenging situations, and it's very important for our committee to continue to monitor this impact and the support that's being provided in any possible way whilst this continues. I mean, I just noticed, and this isn't part of the committee, but just very simple things to keep staff in this really hot weather. I noticed there was kind of free ice lollies and just very simple kind of support that really shows that the trust is thinking, supporting people to keep going, and the committee will continue to monitor this. So the summary highlights as we reviewed the workforce plan, and a bit like kind of David's committee, when I looked at the kind of plan, there's over 40 items that are over the year that we continue to monitor in terms of mandatory reviews, the responsibility of that committee, this committee, and the kind of deep dive work that we need in terms of the more detailed papers that are presented that can provide assurance that things that are really challenging in terms of our people are being addressed in this committee. So we have reviewed the plan and got that scheduled for the year. In terms of the overall performance data, we have a very detailed paper on that. There was a risk of not meeting a 95% compliance on the info and governance training, which would have had an impact. I think everyone stopped
positive way. And can I go on to the next slide, please, and take questions at the end? Thank you. So the next part is about well-being. And you heard, I think, Karen's slide probably was quite good coming first, actually, because she has raised some of the concerns that we have had around staff well-being. But it is really clear that as a trust, we take this very seriously. We've recognised it and are trying to think of ways that we can support our staff. And we are, I feel, quite compassionate in the way that we do this, and we are putting in many different systems and support mechanisms that staff can access. So part of having a wellbeing guardian as an NED is that we take a really sort of holistic approach and look at staff wellbeing across everything. Even if that, you know, it's about the research, it's about the work that's been done through the People and Culture Committee, it's about the work being done through Patient and Safety Committee, and that we constantly challenge it, because our role as a NED, and actually all the non-executive directors, is to act as that critical friend. And what we've done most recently is to ensure that wellbeing is brought to the attention of the board on a regular basis. So we have a report that's now delivered on it, is going to be delivered on a 6-monthly basis through the People and Culture Committee, just focused on wellbeing, and also that then gets reported to the board at the end of the month as well. Then the other thing just to say too is that the NHS has thought really hard about what they want this role to be and what they want this role to achieve, and they have put together an implementation plan for wellbeing guardians on all trusts, and that wellbeing implementation plan has a series of checklists that you can monitor your own progress against these checklists to see that you are beginning to move forward as bringing a really positive culture of wellbeing into your organisation. And we've agreed that actually looking at that checklist as we report every 6 monthly and make sure that we're making progress is going to be the way that we're going to move this forward. And I think that's where I'd like to finish. So if anybody has any questions now, I'd be happy to answer them for you, or at least move them to someone that can answer them better than me.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was a really interesting report. So let's start with James, and then Emma's got a hand up. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, and a really, really important part of the work. And I can feel that you have that reassurance as you're telling us here. I just asked a couple of questions, if I may. You say you do receive this reassurance. In what format? Do you have a dashboard? Do you have a spreadsheet to show every single item when it was first logged and the time scale that it was completed? So that's my first question. And my second question, working with David in patient quality and safety, is there anything that there's any learning from your well-being and speaking up particularly within staff that could transfer across to speaking up for patients, and how that could work? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll answer your first question because I can do that one off the top of my head. So yes, I meet regularly, so every month, with the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian at the Trust, and we have a spreadsheet where every new incident is logged, when it was first logged, and then also who logged it. So was it just a direct contact? Was it coming through another wellbeing guardian in the hospital? And then what we have is who has followed up on that. And then finally, we have another column, what was done about it, which is sometimes it can be quite a simple thing. Sometimes it's a lot more complicated. And then our final column is when we know that everything has been put in place, that's the complaint or the speaking up complaint has been dealt with, and then we can close it. So we see that. And my every month, then what I pick up on is the ones that are new and that have come through, and then also what the ones that have been closed off because they've been finally dealt with. And then that way what I can do is pick up any that are lingering, if that makes sense, and to make sure that there's the reason they're lingering is a very good reason, and that it's complicated and we need to give it due care and attention. And so I think hopefully that answers your question about that one.
Yeah, could I just come back on that specific? Is there a column that any learning that can be taken from it?
There is a column that says what has been changed. So, for example, one of them was about the chapel being used as a place for meetings on occasion, and there was a feeling that that wasn't appropriate, and it was because space was tight, and sometimes it was a nice place to have those kind of meetings, but it was felt that it wasn't appropriate. So in that final column, we sort of said, yeah, you know, this has been looked at, the agreement has been made, it wasn't an appropriate place to have these meetings, it should be kept for what it's there for. And then so we completely see what has happened at the end of it, and learning comes out of it. And that's one thing that I felt is important, because we want to see ourselves as having a just culture. And to me, sometimes the changes in practice or the way that things have been dealt with completely show that we've thought about that in a just way, and we've looked at the systems that are in place. So yeah, we are starting to note that as well. And the second question, which is about patient well-being, of course, well-being is not just about staff, but about patients as well. The well-being, and I think, is the things that I have been picking up through the well-being role. If I'm honest, it's mostly about the well-being of our staff, but that's, and probably not so much in this role about the well-being of patients and their friends and family. However, I do feel that we do look at that really carefully, almost at every board, because we have, my job is to go around wards on occasion and to do sort of the walking tours, and on that I've managed to speak to both staff and patients and have been able to ask some of those kind of, how are you? Are you all right? Are you having a nice time here? Anything that we can help and support you with? But also just to say that we regularly meet with and hear patient experiences as well from the hospital. And during those times when we notice that there could be a wellbeing issue, we do look at that quite carefully too.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma. Emma FD, thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks ever so much for delivering that presentation. Really sense how passionate you are about it, which really comes across. Just thinking on what we're doing at Great Yarmouth Borough Council. So we've changed our locality board into the Great Yarmouth Health and Wellbeing Partnership, just to follow on to the ICP. It would be really good if we could have some representation from you. Obviously, I can send you a list of the meeting dates, but it would be really good for you to get an idea as to how we're working for residents of the borough, and also a lot of the staff at the James Paget that obviously live in the borough, if they are having issues with housing or the cost of living or help meet with food banks. We've got 40 partners on board for this forum, and you'll obviously be able to pick up some different information as to what you could feed back to the employees at the James Paget. So it'd be really good if you, if I could drop you an email with some dates.
That would be fantastic.
Thank
that
you.
link up.
I think probably Jo would need to think about who might be best to attend those meetings to be able to then do the follow-on piece of work. Because obviously, you know, from the NED point of view, our role is to provide the assurance that something is happening rather than operationally to get involved in that. But what Laura might want to do is come along just to kind of indicate her role at the Paget and what's been happening for staff there, just to put some of the context on that. But Jo, did you want to come and add anything on that bit?
Yeah, I think Emma, does John Barber attend those meetings currently, or I know he's planning to in the future?
His name's down. He's yet to attend one yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so I know that there's a lot of work that's happening from the place element of the ICS and the ICB, and how we join that sort of place group, which is the old local delivery group, together with the health and wellbeing partnership, because there is some overlap. So there's a lot of conversations that we're having with the ICS. And then I don't know if you're aware, but John and I also met with Sheila from the Borough Council, and I think is it Darren as well, who is our HOSC link. Daniel, thank you. So we're sort of making a lot of effort into you know, developing those relationships. But yes, that partnership meeting, and I'll have a chat with John about attending in the future. Yeah,
I think I did have a conversation with John at the last Health and Wellbeing Board, and he said to me that the James Paget would probably, his position would probably be more on the strategic transformation part of the ICS, whereas the Health and Wellbeing Partnership Board is sort of more a sort of community borough voluntary care sector widespread, so it would be that direct sort of wellbeing. I think someone mentioned wellbeing champion, so that sort of level. But I mean, at the minute there seems to be quite a lot of confusion over where the place is sitting, so I'm totally in touch with that bit.
It is a little bit confusing still, Emma, so forgive us that we haven't quite got the representation right at every level, and I think when you hear a little bit later, John is coming to our meeting in private, we'll be able to kind of understand a bit more of the complexity of that, and just to make sure that we're not duplicating, because even if we do this super efficiently, we've all got to spread ourselves thinner than we have been to date. My worry is that if we don't do it super efficiently, we'll be adding to that burden, and perhaps not doing any good work anywhere because we're stretched too thin. So we absolutely need to look at it. But you've raised a really good point, and one that we wouldn't want to lose. So thank you for doing that, and we'll make a note to have that conversation. Perhaps bring it up again if you're in the private part of the meeting. We can bring it up again then when John is with us. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Karen, did you have a comment? That your hand up there? You're muted, Karen.
Thanks, Anna. Just very quickly on this. I think this is a really great idea, whoever is the most relevant person to attend. You're quite right, most of the staff do live in the borough, and when we looked at the analysis in detail in terms of sickness, a lot of the short-term sickness is in relation to personal issues. So any kind of support, help, community that can you know, go in terms of supporting the staff would be really great. Thank you.
Thank you both. Very well tied together, those two presentations, so thank you for that. So if you could move us on now to strategic projects, please, and go over to John. Thank you.
Hi. I think my role is two parts. One is to give you an update where we are in strategic projects, but also to give you some reassurance around the governance around it. I enjoyed being with you, and Ian made some good challenges on the 16th of June in terms of what I'm trying to present. So by all means, ask questions. I've tried to adjust the slides accordingly to take some lessons there. We've got a remit of really looking at four things. Three are key strategic projects we have. The fourth is the reinforced aerated autoclave concrete. I always have to read it because we always refer to it as RAC. We continue to get updates on this. A couple of months ago, we approved a business case light on this. Region wants to approve it quickly. We'll find out next week whether its business case has been updated, but in essence, it's a £14.4 million business case. The biggest chunk of it is £11 million for a decantment ward, a 28-bed ward. The timetable we've got for this is theoretically the end of March. We'd like to see this up and running. So we do need to move on this one quickly. In general, the RAC project is going well. They're putting these timber and bearing extensions in. We get updates on that each month of where we're at, and that they're making good progress in terms of some of the work that's being done in the day case unit. That was one of the key issues that we had on that. So I think we're getting regular updates on this. It still is one of our extreme risks. So we'll continue to monitor this closely moving forward. In terms of the three major projects, we've got three of them. They're all at slightly different stages of the approval process. We've talked before about strategic outline case, and full business case are really the three steps. In terms of giving you reassurance, we as a board approve things, but they also need to go for these large business cases to regional office. The NHS needs to approve some of these nationally as well. So that's a big piece of the reassurance that we have that where we're at. The one that's most developed is the Diagnostic Assessment Centre. This is about a 74 million pound business case that's going across the three acute sites. We're hoping that ours will be up and running in March 2024. January next year, ideally construction would work. I think that we have the outline business case approval. They're pulling together the full business case, and we hope to see that in August. So the timetable that we have is still on the timetable we have. I think the biggest risk we have around this is the inflationary pressure on this. I put in the slide the wonderful NHS speak of optimism bias. We're required to put business cases together in a structured way. They want us to put something in that says stuff may happen going forward, and we need to add an additional value to that. So there is a value for optimism bias in these business cases as they go through the system. And sometimes you wonder why, but this time it seems to be justified because we will have some inflation. And right now we're keeping our fingers crossed that when we get the final price on this, the optimism bias and other refinements will still cover it within the overall envelope of the funding that's been nationally approved. So that one is progressing to the timetable that we want. I'm just giving a highlight that inflation is an issue that we've talked about quite a bit. In terms of the electronic patient record, this one has been going on for some time. The complexities, and I think you'll agree it is appropriate that we get one system across the three acute hospitals in Norfolk and Waveney, is that we are refining the strategy around this. A year ago, we were hoping to have a system that was closely tied to some of the GP systems. Our bosses nationally have said that we think you should implement a well-established system that is in use elsewhere. I personally tend to agree with that, but I think that is one of the refinements we have. I think that there's a big push nationally to get these better systems in place. I think they want to provide us with the capital, the upfront investment to get these systems in place. And we have to jump through the right hoops to get formal approval, but we think that will happen. I think the real challenge is the ongoing revenue costs of this. We had a lengthy discussion at the last meeting around how this is accounted for. And again, I'm really impressed with Ed Taylor. My challenge is to Ed, because I'm an ex-finance director, he came back with some very, very good answers. They're trying to understand how this should appropriately be accounted for. I think that the good thing, what I like within the James Paget is that it isn't a mindset of, yeah, we'll just say yes, we'll make whatever savings we need to deal with and then worry about how that happens 3, 4, 5 years later. They are taking this issue seriously in terms of whether the revenue consequences and really getting involved with that. But Ed and others are working closely with the other hospitals in the regional office. We've reviewed an outline business case. It's going to need to be refined. And the committee in common that Anna talked about earlier will have a role in approving that. But I think we're getting reasonably close on the outline business case on that one. And hopefully we'll be able to have some more definitive timetable moving forward on that one. The third project that we talk about is the new hospital project. This one has a much longer time frame to it. We still talk about the new hospital by 2030 because it's so far out. The specific components of the timetable get refined, but the end date is still there. The 1st of April, we did approve an outline business case, a strategic outline business case as a board. The regional office has said, don't do any more on that. They're kind of waiting for clarity on how the overall program works. There's 40 or 48 hospitals that are going to be in the program. I think 40 are formally recognized, and they keep talking about adding a handful of them. and they're really trying to figure out how this program is going to work nationally. I think that wouldn't want to be quoted on saying is that they're still looking for how they're going to afford all of this, but they have made the commitment to the hospitals there, and so they're trying to fit that commitment with the funding that they ideally would like to spend. I think that will be an interesting challenge. So the work is progressing on the outline business case there. We're still waiting for that clarity on the national hospital program, how it's going to work together. I think that the team here at the Paget are working really well with the regional office. It's never good to have friction there, and I don't seem to be seeing any real friction there, which is good. I think the final bit that I would highlight is that we recognize that we do need to replace the residency for staff residencies. That isn't formally part of the NHS program, and so we're still looking at creative ways that can be built and be earmarked for our staff. I think that there continue to be discussions with the councils and others on how this would work. We've had external advisors giving us advice on that, so we're continuing to see how that is progressing, and hopefully it will fall into place moving forward. Happy to take any questions anyone has. Ian's warned me that I should have more questions than I usually do, so happy to take questions.
Tony, first question.
Thank you, John, for your presentation. As usual, it's very interesting. My question, I suppose, is historically, we've always thought about linking the hospitals with the GPs. And I know there's been difficulties in the past because they use different systems. Is there any long-term plans for this to actually come to fruition where they're all linked, where you're all linked up together?
I think that the ICS clearly has this in the remit. I haven't stayed close to the ICS IT agenda, but it was a big piece on that. I can come back with more details on that. I think that the issue really is that systems should be able to talk to each other, and it really is the degree of how they talk to each other, and they do need to push this agenda. I know that there is ICS agenda to try to build some of that connection in place and put systems in place. I don't have the details right now, but we could bring something back to you if that was helpful.
Yeah, I think information would be appreciated later. Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you. Mary.
Yeah, thank you. My question is fairly similar to Tony's, really. With the electronic patient record, I suppose it's too simple for the whole NHS to use the same system. So, you know, like if you were taken ill somewhere else, that your records could be picked up easily.
They have talked about a national spine, NHS spine, for about 25 years. I probably had white hair when they first started hearing about that, but they continue to talk about this desire. There is limited ability to have some connections, but I think that the real benefits is around us being able to really have the right IT in the clinician's hands, and then the next step, having it connected to the other hospitals. I think that the question we had a moment ago around linking it to the GP, I think that's really important. Yes, I don't understand why we don't have a single national system, but that isn't what the plan is right now. They're trying to limit it to a handful of systems, and ideally they should be able to talk to each other better than they are. But I think you've got a good question, and I don't really have an answer for it. I don't know if Joe's got any more information that could reassure you.
Well, no, we can't reassure Mary because it isn't going to happen. I don't think it's never been the case that there was many years ago, and I'm quite old, so thinking about it, there was an aborted attempt to have one NHS IT system that cost many billions of pounds and basically got thrown away in the middle of it. That was a national scheme. That was a long time ago. I think they learned from that actually every system is different, every hospital is different, every needs are different, but there are industry standard, international industry standard companies who provide similar sorts of systems. And yes, they do speak to GPs, but it's not the same system as the GPs, if you like. So it does do the right thing, but it's complicated enough getting 3 hospitals to actually align their processes, because it isn't just about the records. It isn't just about, you know, my name is Anna Davidson and this is my date of birth and these are all my problems. It's a lot more about how each hospital approaches each illness, each pathway, and we have a lot of work to do to actually ensure that we can get a meaningful system across the 3 trusts. I think it would stall if you were trying to do it more broadly than that, and we'd never really get anywhere. So given also the amount of resource that it's going to take nationally to bring those of us who don't have an electronic patient record up to the level of others in the country who do, and each system is very expensive, not just in terms of the initial capital costs, but the long-term licensing costs, for example, are very, very high. Obviously, you'll know, Mary, as a politician better than most of us, how stretched our national finances are, and we simply, whilst it might be a nice sensible thing to aim for, there isn't the money, I don't think, nationally or locally to be able to tackle anything broader than what we've set our plans out for. So I don't think that's within our remit to change, sadly, but you can use your political avenues to raise those issues more widely, with pleasure, in other places, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mary.
Just a thought.
Yeah, well, wouldn't it be nice if things were more joined up, but there we go. So thank you, John. I think we need to move on now, if we can, to Paula, to the performance and finance slide, and then we're going to go back to Joe at the end of that for the chief executive slide. So Paula.
Thanks very much, Anna, and good morning, everybody. I'd like to start with performance, and everybody will be aware, you haven't heard from Jo this morning, but I know she would have told you what extreme pressure the hospital is under at the moment. You'll have heard in the news about the ambulance trusts throughout the country being on high alert, and the hot weather is only serving to exacerbate the situation. So I want to add my thanks to, I'm sure, everybody else, to Jo and the rest of the team at the Paget for keeping things running under very, very difficult circumstances. If we look to our last committee meeting, and this is ongoing, you'll have heard this before, but in terms of our focus with performance, we continue to focus on urgent and emergency care, elective recovery, and those patients with a right to discharge from the hospital because they're medically fit. Those are the really key issues that we focus on. I can report some good news, that the pieces of progress here against each of those. Our phase 3 build to provide new paediatric facilities has started, so that's good. Our elective orthopaedic work is going at pace, but it's difficult to balance when we have so many COVID positive patients in the hospital. We're doing a bit better on cancer standards and met 6 of the 9 cancer standards in April, with particular improvement in breast and prostate pathways, which are both very common, as you're aware. And work is ongoing to transform our outpatient services. Having said that, I think one of the things that I'm particularly concerned about, well, we're all concerned about, is this delayed discharges. And thank you for your offer of support, everybody, but I particularly make a cri de coeur to colleagues in both district and county councils to keep an eye on what is being done from a social care point of view. And if you can think of anything more that can be done to help us improve patient outcomes and better deploy the resources that are being spent on these patients who are delayed with us in our charge, that would be great. We'd be pleased to have your help and support there. Now, in terms of finances, if I give you a little bit of background, well, I don't need to give you really background in terms of context. You'll all be aware in terms of what the previous Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, was doing in terms of tightening the financial purse strings in the light of what's going on globally in Ukraine and also in our own country with the pressures. And I think it's going to get tougher and tougher in terms of NHS finances and how we work together to make sure the resources that we have got are deployed to best effect. Consequence of that, and we don't know what any new Prime Minister or new Chancellor is going to do in terms of if that's going to put even more pressure on us from a financial point of view. But the support we've had over the last 2 years changed for this year, and we have had to submit with the ICS a balanced financial plan, which has meant that we have quite a bit of risk in there in terms of whether we think as a system and as a hospital we can actually balance our books this year. And we're working hard to understand that risk, which is unmitigated as far as JPUH is concerned at nearly £13 million. So we've got a higher level of risk in terms of finances than we did have previously, and that's why my committee is meeting every month and looking at performance and finance in detail every month. I'm pleased to report that plans to meet a very challenging efficiency target of nearly 14 million are progressing better. We have much more granularity on that, and we have a higher level of assurance than we have had in the last couple of months there, so that's good progress. Something that's been even more challenging is to produce evidence in support of our Care Quality Commission use of resources inspection, to make sure that we are working as efficiently as possible and looking at, for instance, different specialties and looking at whether we're deploying our resources as effectively as other hospitals and so on. And the committee continues to ask for assurance in that regard. So those are the key points I wanted to highlight this month. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paula. So any questions for Paula? Ian, thank you.
Thank you, Paula, and particularly on that last bullet point, a question I was going to ask you there, you made that point about that benchmarking, so we're not just looking internally, so making that very clear. Just going back to cancer standards, great to see the progress in there. Are there any barriers to us meeting all 9 cancer standards?
I think I'm going to defer that to Jo as our previous ops director. She'll be able to answer that much more precisely than I can, but I'm sure part of that will be having the right staff in place to meet the demand. But Jo, if you might help me out here, please.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thanks, Paula. So I think it's multifactorial why those standards are not achieved. Some of it is demand, and some of the demand that we saw through the pandemic, and we're still clearing backlog of patients from that time. And I suppose the biggest barrier that we have is through our diagnostic pathways. We prioritise these as much as possible. And we have invested in new facilities for the MR building, and obviously we've had a mobile CT van, and we have got some independent sector support for our endoscopy service. But it is the demand of patients and managing those patients through their pathway. So there are some good plans in place, but yeah, it's still some of our patients are still waiting longer than we would like.
And Jo, the other aspect as well is that we don't deliver the whole pathway for some of those services. So some of them, Ian, might be patients that live in our community, but they might need to be referred to the NNN because it's a more specialist area of cancer that we don't cover at the JPUH. So some of those delays, they're shared delays, if you like. They're ones that we share as across the acutes. But we take responsibility, even though they might be waiting to be seen at the NNUH. So there are those sort of practical barriers as well. But again, it is, as Jo says, a lot of people didn't necessarily put themselves forward during the pandemic, but then there was a big surge after the pandemic, the worst of the pandemic ended, where people then did start to come through their GPs, and obviously that then translates into a big surge coming through. at a time when we're already dealing with a lot of other difficulties in terms of, you know, moving patients around who might already have COVID and so on and so forth. So, you know, it is quite complicated, but certainly as a board, it's something we keep very, very close eye on, and we do very much look at those figures in detail at Paula's committee, and then that assurance is provided at board level. So thank you for that question. Okay, good. So if there are no other questions then for Paula, thank you, Paula, really helpful slides there. Could we go back to Joe's slides, Sue, at the beginning, if we could, and recognising, Joe, that you I've already explained you had a conflicting system meeting that you obviously couldn't really avoid being late, so thank you for coming along.
Yeah, no, thanks, Anna. It's actually made my life much easier because a lot of the areas that I'm going to talk about have probably all been covered by the slides and some of the questions. So, so hopefully I'll be able to go through these quite quickly for you. So just really on COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen quite a lot of changes over the last few months to the infection prevention and control guidance at a national level, and changes to how we manage patients who may or may not have COVID when they enter the building. So the testing regime has changed quite a lot, but we are still testing patients on admission on day 3 and day 6 of when they're in the hospital. We're also wearing, continue to wear face masks in our clinical areas and in particular our wards, and we encourage all of our visitors to do the same. Despite those precautions that we've put in place, we have seen an increase in COVID numbers over the last few weeks, and we're now up into the sort of the high 40s of patients. Some of those have come in from the community with COVID, and that's the reason for their admission. And some of those patients we have detected COVID whilst they've been with us. So it is still very high on the agenda for the hospital, and we're still managing that patient demand. We've already heard from Paula regarding the operational pressures from emergency, urgent and emergency demand, and that continues. You know, an element of that is due to some of the COVID demand, but also the issues that we have with discharging patients from the hospital when they don't need to be here. And that was one of the reasons I was late, because we were having a system discussion regarding some really focused actions that we're taking across the whole of Norfolk and Waveney to try and manage and support that discharge piece. But it does impact on patients, obviously coming into the hospital, you know, the care that they receive while they're with us, and also the pressure on staff of having to manage and deal with that, the pressure on a daily basis. So it is a big concern for us. Some more positive news, we have appointed an armed forces advocate. This is part of one of the national programmes, and we received some funding for that. And he's a gentleman who was in the forces and is working with us to support both staff and patients who were or have been in the forces at some time, and maybe as part of their forces work has led them to become unwell, or as part of our workforce. So he's actively going out and meeting with staff, and will be meeting with patients when they are admitted to the hospital. I think Karen alluded about the staff award. She's already mentioned that, so apologies, there was a bit of an error in that bullet point, but we had 360 nominations for staff awards, and I'm really looking forward to that award ceremony in October, when we'll see the outcome of the panel and the decisions that have been made. So really looking forward to that, and I know our staff really enjoy those award events every year. Just go on to the next slide. Just looking at some of our governance and statutory and regulatory responsibilities, we did have a Care Quality Commission unannounced visits back in February, so they came on 2 separate occasions to review our medical and our urgent and emergency care services. That was part of a wider system piece of work, a system review, where they also went to primary care, the ambulance service, and the other acutes. So the report was released to us in May. It wasn't a a graded report, so we received no ratings as a result of that, because it was a new way of the CQC looking at system work as opposed to individual organisations. But there were some really positive highlights in there for our staff and the services that we provide. And we received no must do's, which are that's the sort of the biggest concern that the CQC would raise on the day. And no immediate concerns, but we did have some, I think there was 4 should do's that are actively being worked on. One of it was regarding joining up our electronic systems within our urgent and emergency department, and we've already heard about the work that we're trying to do with the EPR. And there were some elements regarding pressure area equipment for patients because they were waiting in ED longer than they should be because of the delayed discharges. But we are working on all of the actions and some of the comments that came out, and that really helped us to think about our prep for any future inspections of the hospital that we may see later this year. We were also really pleased to get certification for our information security management system. That was an ISO award, and the IT department had done a huge amount of work to get ready for that. So that was a really positive achievement. Just looking at some of the board appointments, as you are probably aware, I used to be the Chief Operating Officer within the Trust, so we've had that vacancy. We have had an interim post in for a period of time. We did go through a competitive recruitment process, but weren't able to recruit on that occasion. But we are currently going through a second process. And so I'm hopeful that we will be able to recruit into that post. But our interim is obviously still with us until that time and is working really well with the rest of the exec team. The other one is Hazel Stewart is leaving us as our medical director at the end of July, and we were really pleased to announce that Vivek Chitri, our deputy medical director, has been appointed into that post, and he'll pick that up on the 1st of August. There has been some national consultation on governance documents that has been released back in, I think it was June, July time. So Charlie has been working through for me on what those changes may or may not mean for us. There's still draft documents at the moment, so we're expecting those to be released later in the year. And I think he will then be providing a sort of a further update separately to you just on what those proposed changes may or may not look like. A lot of them were relating to the system and how the Trust will interact with the ICB and the ICS and what that may mean for the role of a governor, but very little change, fundamental change, but no doubt there will be some changes that we'll share with you later in the year. So just some of the good news, we opened up our GP streaming unit at the front of the hospital in May. This is a service that's provided by North Norfolk Primary Care, and it is very much a primary care service, and that really does help us decongest the ED department. So really positive development, and that's enabled us to then do the work to develop the paediatric department that Paula was talking about earlier. And there is our absolute star John Chapman in the bottom of that picture for all of his work that he did on peanut allergy. So it started as a research project looking at peanut allergies, but there is now a new treatment for it, which we are one of the first places in the country to be able to offer that as a treatment. So it really does demonstrate how research can lead into changes in clinical practice. So really positive, and he was actually on BBC Look East as well, being interviewed. So I'm sure you'll be able to see that link when we circulate the slides. The other really good news is that our maternity services have been shortlisted for an HSJ award for the fast track COVID vaccination programme that they put in place for pregnant people. So we're really hopeful that they will be winners at that event when that's announced. And more recently, the Trust did some work with our LGBTQ+ network and a Pride event, and we had Pride Month during June. And those who may have been aware and may actually took part in the carnival, a number of our staff were at the carnival last weekend just to celebrate the Paget 40 years. And there was a big element of raising awareness for bowel cancer. So, you know, a number of our staff took part in that, and I was away, unfortunately, so I wasn't able to join them, but I've seen the pictures that our comms team have taken. So really great to see our staff out in the local community as well. So I think happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jo. Are there any questions for Jo? I think, as you say, most of what you've said we covered earlier, but we've got a few questions. So Ian, would you like to come in first?
Yeah, sorry, I jumped in too quickly there. Jo, I think that's probably your first in-person report to us. So thank you very much for that. I think it was the first time you sort of seem to have been there forever, but the first time in terms of, so thanks very much. I'm going completely left field. Thank you. You know, there's so much challenge in there. What's the thing that you're most pleased about that you've done in your opening tenure? Just, you know, it's a totally random left field. So celebrate something you're really pleased about.
Cool, that's a difficult question, Ian. Put me on the spot. I think, you know, at the moment we have such a fantastic executive team here. And I'm really pleased that they've really rallied around me, if you like, as part of that team, and that we've been able to successfully recruit the medical director and really cement that team and make that sort of sustainable. So it may not seem a huge thing, but I think it's really, really important to have that senior leadership team in place and working really effectively. And I have to say they are fantastic. So, you know, I think it's building that team and cementing that team has been the most positive thing in the short time that I've been in post.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let's take Mary's next and then James. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd really just like to say really well done on the peanut allergy program, because I have a granddaughter who has to carry an EpiPen with her all the time because she does have the peanut allergy. So that is really brilliant news for everybody. So well done, everyone.
Thanks, Mary, and we'll make sure that the governor's comments are passed back to Dr. Chapman and the whole team that worked on it, because it was a team effort. James.
Yes, thank you very much, and yeah, congratulations to everybody on that project and the other research projects as we talked about before. Are you able just to, because very, very fortunately I haven't had to visit the James Paget recently, thank goodness. The GP streaming, just for information, and if other members of the public are listening, then they'll be able to gain that. Is it a case that this is the place you go to before you go to accident emergency, so you are triaged out, or do you still go to accident emergency and then you'd go to the GP streaming?
So at the moment, you still come to the emergency department and then are triaged across to the GP streaming unit, because we have to be mindful. This isn't to replace primary care services. It's really to help decongest the department. And we know a lot of our patients come here because of the access is much easier, the transport links, and also for our holiday makers, because we do see a big increase in the summer of holiday makers, and we don't have any other facilities for them at the moment. So it does help with that decongesting of the ED, but it is very much about ED managing that pathway through rather than patients self-selecting.
Yes, so the reason for my question was whether that was part of the triage system, but actually it's after the triage, so it isn't somebody see them with a medical, like a doctor saying actually you need to go next door to accident emergency, or no, go away and your toenail will fall off in good time or something.
Yeah, no, it's very much a triage service that's run by our clinical teams from ED, and we're really encouraging people to actually access emergency services through 111, because they can do quite a lot to directing patients through other routes, you know, and some of them absolutely, you know, are directed to their own primary care or are advised to attend ED. So it's then about how we manage them as part of that. So, but 111 should always be the first port of call for people.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Jo, for that report. So can we now move on, please, on the agenda to item 5, which is the paper on the kind of programme of our meetings going forward. Charlie, can we take it as read, but any key points that you want to just pull out of that, please?
Thank you, Chair. No, there's nothing I need to highlight. I'm sure that the council and the non-executive directors and yourselves are very familiar with how you've reached the conclusions about whether or not to be meeting in person and when that's appropriate. So this is a timetable I've inherited. So if there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer, but I may not know the answers.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, so effectively we're going for a hybrid model going forward. So some of our board meetings will be held face-to-face, some not, and the paper sets out which of those will be, and exactly the same will be the case with the Governor's Council meetings. So clearly we can't put anything held in stone. This might change again if the pandemic and the infection control indicates that we need to do things differently, but for now this is what we're aiming to do, to have a mixture of some in-person and some virtual, for all the reasons that are on the first slide around efficiency, as well as trying to get that balance right of what you can do face to face and what you can't. So I hope that's helpful. Any particular questions on that paper? It's really just to note for you all. Good, thank you. So now move on to the final paper, I think, is paper number 6. Which is, again, Charlie, would you take this as read? This is just about the process of the appraisals that have taken place in the NEDs. But
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so once again, I've inherited this and it's been clearly documented by Anne Philby on her way out. So the appraisal is in terms of assessing the performance of each of the non-executive directors and the chair, and setting individual non-exec director and the chair's objectives for the forthcoming year in alignment with the trust's objectives. This exercise is being conducted in accordance with the national guidance available from NHS England and the NHS Leadership Academy, which is detailed and useful. Right down to templates, so very helpful piece of work from the two organisations, and a more detailed report is going to be available in the private session that follows this public session of the Council of Governors.
Thank you, Charlie. So any questions at all on the process, which is really just to remind you all of how it happens? If not, we will note that update as well. So coming back to the list of things, is there any other business at all from first of all from members of the council? I would like to raise one thing which has occurred to me as I've been going through this meeting, that our next council won't be until I think the next meeting in public is in November, I believe, which means that actually this will be the last meeting for both Paula and for Laura. So I would like to say, I did say something about Laura at the beginning of the meeting. I was sort of in my head not thinking it was Paula's last meeting, but of course it is. So Paula, I just wanted to say on behalf of all of the Council of Governors how sad we are to see you going, because actually you've played an enormous role as a NED in terms of keeping the board really focused on the right things, and your own personal compassion and values have absolutely shone throughout your tenure as a NED. I will miss you tremendously. I know your fellow NEDs and all the board will miss both your challenge and your support enormously, and we will get the opportunity to say this many, many times, but on behalf of the council, I wanted to say that today. For everything that you've done, thank you so much.
Thanks, Anna, I appreciate that. And in return, I want to thank my colleagues on the board, but also you as the Council of Governors, to Ian and all the rest of you. I think we have an enviable relationship of trust and confidence in each other, which means we can surface some of the difficult issues and together discuss them and get assurance and work together to further outcomes for our patients. So I've really enjoyed my 6 years at the Trust, and I wish you all well for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. And then just to say on Laura's behalf again, you know, Laura, you've been with us a relatively short time, but, you know, again, we've really valued having you as part of the board and enjoyed having you as part of the board, and you've brought a whole range of different skills and competencies with you. And I know you have roots in the Great Yarmouth area as well, which has, I think, underlined your commitment to us. But thank you so much for everything you've done for us also, and again we'll hope to have the opportunity at other times to say thank you as well. If you're still there, I don't know if you wanted to say anything.
I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to do my role as an ed, and you've given me some really brilliant portfolios that I've really taken to and appreciated it, and I've learned a lot from my role, and I know that I'm going to be using it as I go forward. So thank you for that. It's been very valuable. And
I know that you'll be helping us to try to choose in a sense, or recommending perhaps some ways of finding someone as good as you. And I know it will be very, very difficult, but we look forward to trying to do that. But thank you again, Laura, and we'll look forward to seeing you at other things in the meantime. So any questions at all from members of the public now at this point? Unfortunately, I think Miss Grote, who joined us for the majority of the meeting, has put a note in the email box to say how much she enjoyed the meeting, and she is a governor at the NNN, so it's quite interesting for her to view how we're undertaking the assurance role here in terms of how governors hold NEDs to account. So I will look forward to following up some of her reflections with their chair and through their chair in due course. And she said that she will attend again, which is lovely. So that's all good. So and some very nice thank yous as well in the chat box from some of the other governors. So thank you for that. So our next meeting is actually our AGM, which will be a virtual meeting at the end of September, the 27th. And then our next council of governors will actually be one that will be held in public, and that is on the 9th of November, subject to it being safe to do that, and we will obviously advise you if that's not the case. So thank you all very much indeed.